During Brett Kavanaugh's first week as a Supreme Court justice, the White House put in a request for the court to strike down another request for Secretary Wilbur Ross to testify in regards to his decision to add a question about citizenship in the next census. Hard to guess how Justice Brett, "You Dems will reap the whirlwind" Kavanaugh will lean on this issue, but it's not that hard to guess how Justice Brett, "Don't investigate the president for crimes" Kavanaugh will lean on this issue. The case claims that adding citizenship to the census is not only a clear attempt to deport people, but also it will cause inaccuracies in the census because people don't want to be deported. This, of course, is just one of the moves and policies implemented by the Trump administration that identifies in-groups and out-groups within the in-group that must be detained and expelled. I wonder what that's a feature of. This, of course, is only referring to particularly animalistic illegal aliens, not human beings. It refers only to the most violent criminals, not refugees or asylum seekers or children or lawful permanent residents, or, oh hey, it's Brett Kavanaugh again, already, supporting the Trump administration's policy of detaining and deporting legal immigrants who had committed misdemeanors or felonies years ago and served their time. This, of course, is happening while the government continues to put more and more migrant children in camps across the country, some of those children being adopted by other people after their parents are deported. And apropos of nothing, here's some news. Part of the UN's definition of genocide involves forcibly transferring the children of a group to another group. But we're fair and balanced, TMCR at Cody Shody, so to be fair, the other part of the definition of genocide requires intent to exterminate. So we don't have explicit intent here. But to be balanced, maybe halfway to genocide ain't so great either. Anyway, things seem a little bit fashy, huh? So it's time for another installment of Life in the Fash Lane. Before we move forward, though, the word fascist is thrown around a lot these days, often incorrectly, by liars and propagandists saying that fascism is left-wing, and Hitler was a liberal socialist, two words that don't even go together. And there are countless resources and historians that can explain why people like this are f***ing morons and liars, you lying f***ing morons. So I won't spend more time on that, and if you'd like an in-depth look at what American fascism actually looks like, spoiler alert, this guy, check out videos and books and articles linked in the description of this video. Here's the gist. But fascism, above all that stuff I tried to cram in very quickly, is a rejection of democracy. It's authoritarian or totalitarian in nature. The leader doesn't listen to the people, but rather listens to what he says the people want. Hitler and Mussolini never won the majority vote, which is maybe relevant, maybe not. But fascism is a rejection of the idea of a democratic society. And once more, apropos of nothing, here's some more of the news. In Brett Kavanaugh's first decision as a Supreme Court justice, the Supreme Court just cut off voting rights for Native Americans in North Dakota by only allowing residents with street addresses to vote, knowing full well that the United States Postal Service only gives tribal residents P.O. boxes. This obvious attempt at voter suppression is nothing new for the United States, which the Economist Intelligence Unit has marked as not a full democracy 2 years in a row. First of all, just 2 years? All right. And one could probably say, well, actually, we're not a democracy, we're a constitutional representative republic, a form of democracy. And you're saying that because you're boring. Because maybe it's not a good thing that after 2 out of the 3 recent presidents did not win the majority of the vote, and one of those just nominated a wildly unpopular judge to the Supreme Court, and that wildly unpopular judge was confirmed with little care or transparency by a majority party that did not get the majority vote due to decades of voter suppression and gerrymandering in order to curb democracy and gain power. After sitting on the previous wildly popular president's choice for more than a year, and then Mitch McConnell blames it on the Democrats getting rid of the filibuster for court appointments, which they only did because Mitch McConnell said he would block every single judge indefinitely. But that's just how America works, you say, awfully. The Founding Fathers wanted to make sure the powerful few couldn't be overly influenced by the people. Good point. Maybe the best idea for a government ever wasn't thought of by a bunch of rich white slave owners in the 1700s. Hell, even Thomas Jefferson thought the Constitution should be rewritten every generation, by his estimation every 19 or so years. But the Republicans like this, because they're actually anti-democracy. They only care about power. They don't want people to vote because they know the majority of the country disagrees with them on just so many of their proposed policies. They've made sure companies and the wealthy have a disproportionate amount of power and influence over politics. They do not care that that is not democracy. They try to dismiss any opposition, claiming all of these people are funded by George Soros. But maybe Republicans always talk about this George Soros conspiracy because they all get paid by billionaires to spout bullshit and influence politics. The Koch brothers literally bragged about it. Maybe they talk about paid protesters so much because they can't fathom anyone caring about something enough to protest if they're not getting paid. Maybe the president announced his own campaign by paying people to be in the crowd and didn't pay them for over a year until he got sued. Maybe Mike Pence went to a football game specifically to protest the players' protest, which cost taxpayers $325,000. America's official paid protester, Mike Pence. And speaking of paid protesters, when the president lost the popular vote, no, not that one. That one! When he lost the popular vote and there was a recount, the GOP paid a bunch of GOP operatives to pretend to be Florida citizens protesting the recount. It was called the Brooks Brothers riot. Literally paid protesters by the GOP to protest democracy. One of them was Roger Stone, Trump's buddy and best friend of and back tattoo haver of Richard Nixon, famous for inventing rat f***ing. But the president is positive everyone who disagrees with him is a paid protester. They're just crazy left-wing mobs, he says unironically immediately after his supporters chant "lock her up" about Dianne Feinstein. Mobs. That seems to be what everyone is saying these days. It's good that the president's bullshit that the GOP criticized 2 years ago is now stuff that they are saying. This is the language applied to any protest now. This has been a long time coming. The J20 protests on Inauguration Day that resulted in property damage also resulted in a bunch of arrests. But unfortunately for the right-wing demagogue who hates protests, it did not result in any convictions. But back then, J20 was the violent left-wing mob. The Women's March, the Science March, the Tax March, sure, they're paid protesters, but they were the peaceful ones. But now, in the eyes of the president and the GOP and a lot of the mainstream media, those two different groups of protesters are the same. Any left-leaning protest is a violent mob. Here's a video of people banging on the doors of the Supreme Court. Appalling! These couple of teens banging on the door for a few seconds and then security guards stand around while people shout. See? Violent terrorists. A mob is a large crowd intent on violence. It's not a large crowd intent on protesting loudly and then a couple of teens bang on the door for their Instagram posts. Powerful figures on the right seem to believe in the violent left-wing mob narrative about which the president is regularly and successfully ginning up fear. He calls Democrats evil regularly. Rand Paul's wife bought a gun because she's afraid of liberals breaking into her home. And sure, her husband was beat up, but not by a liberal about politics, by a neighbor about a shrub. These days, when someone says we're going to protest Republican lawmakers by protesting where they work, their office, where they eat, restaurants, and where they sleep, their homes, reasonable, smart thinkers who aren't powerful government officials will say, if you break into my bedroom, I'll f***ing shoot you in the face. Fox News often talks about the dangers of the coming race war or the coming civil war. But the left doesn't stockpile guns or talk about civil war. When you look at protesters protesting powerful senators at meals, or a crowd of people protesting in the Capitol, and your reaction is, the left wants a war, they want to kill you, they want to kill us, it actually makes it seem like you want a war. Like you want to kill people? You know who are the only people who talk about a civil war? 4chan, Alex Jones, Gun Nuts, Fox News. NRA just put out a mailer that says leftists want to kidnap and rape your children. Rand Paul is afraid someone is gonna get killed. And sure, I could point out how many people will die from inaction on climate change, but instead, it's time for our news segment. Someone did die, and her name was Heather Heyer. Here's a violent mob. It's Unite the Right, a collection of fascists and white nationalists and neo-Nazis who are all very supportive of Donald Trump, someone who thinks there are bad people on both sides as well as fine people on both sides. The goal of this rally, as is the goal with much fascist violence, is to provoke the other side for violence, so they can both play the victim and be violent against or possibly kill the other side. Here's some recent news. A right-wing terrorist was convicted for being a terrorist after he boarded an Amtrak train with a gun and yelled about protecting everyone from black people. Well, here's that person at the Unite the Right rally, standing right next to James Fields, another fascist, who killed Heather Heyer with his car. Leaked chat logs even show organizers of the event talking about running over protesters with their cars. This is a violent mob, intent on hurting or killing people. This is a crowd of protesters shouting about not being properly represented in the democracy in which we allegedly live, and a couple of teens banging on the door. This both-sidism is wrong, and it's grotesque. It means you think property is equal to human life, and you think fighting for equality and human rights is equal to fascists wanting to kill liberals. That protesting and bothering powerful people at restaurants is equal to the desire for violence and death of your opponents. When you see protesters and you think, it's time for civil war, let me buy lots of guns to shoot these people, it means that you kind of want to do that. So what do we do when the president calls the opposing party that got the majority of the votes evil and dismisses every single possible way to communicate discontent, as well as voting? Vote? I mean, yes, vote. Call your senator? Complain? Tell him to suck shit? Protest, but then be completely dismissed? General strike, maybe? At what point is action, not violent civil war action, taken? Wasn't taken the Muslim ban, that didn't do it. Not kidnapping kids, not the constant lies or dismantling of environmental protection, or when the president ignores Saudi Arabia murdering a US resident and journalist because they buy weapons from us, which they use in our joint quest to devastate Yemen. What do we do when the president, who laments the violent left-wing mob, spent a year promoting violence at his own rallies? What do we do about that when his party shamelessly supports him and is taken to dismantling and discrediting democracy? When all of your options are stripped away and delegitimized by an increasingly illegitimate government, and the opposing minority is in power and also seems to kind of want a civil war? What do? When the people aren't heard and the planet isn't protected because the extremely wealthy are desperate to protect capital and power? When the mainstream media falls for the lie that any semblance of incivility or protest is incitement of violence, and when they won't hold powerful and influential people accountable or talk about real issues because they're focused on civility and norms and maintaining the status quo? Well, good for you, because I've got the golden solution. All we have to do is just... I was going to solve it. Hey everybody, thank you so much for watching that video. Be sure to check out our podcast, Even More News, on the podcast things, and our patreon.com/somemorenews if you'd like to support our show. And that's the end of it. Like and subscribe, do the YouTube stuff. It's your first day on YouTube, so you didn't know to do that until I told you. You're welcome.